My name is Elaine Gaines. I'm 32 years old. And on the morning of my wedding, the only message I got from my mother said, "Don't make them." That was it. No greeting. No explanation. No love wrapped around the words. Just 3 unfinished words that felt heavier than any sentence she could have completed. I was sitting on the edge of the hotel bed when my phone buzzed. The room smelled like hairspray and warm fabric. My wedding dress hung from the closet door, wrapped in clear plastic, quiet and patient. Outside the window, the city was already awake. Cars humming, people laughing somewhere below. Life moving forward like nothing important was about to happen. I stared at the screen, waiting for the rest of the message to load. My thumb hovered like maybe the phone was slow, like maybe the sentence hadn't finished arriving yet. It didn't. Don't make them. I read it again. Then again, slower this time, like if I took my time, the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder. Something like don't make them worry, or don't make them rush, or don't make them feel pressured. But I knew my mother. I knew exactly what she meant. Don't make them uncomfortable. Don't make them feel guilty. Don't make them change their plans. Don't make this about you. My chest tightened, not sharply, not dramatically. Just enough to remind me of a feeling I'd known my whole life. That quiet ache you learn to carry so well that you stop calling it pain. Behind me, the bathroom door was cracked open. Steam floated out as my maid of honor curled her hair, humming to herself. Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed and someone laughed too loudly. Everything around me was full of movement and excitement, but I felt strangely paused, like someone had pressed a finger against my life and held it there. I typed back once, deleted it, typed again, deleted that too. What was I supposed to say? Finish your sentence? Who is them? Do you even remember what day this is? I locked my phone and set it face down on the bed like it might say something worse if I let it. I told myself not to read into it. I'd been doing that my whole life, finding explanations where none were offered, softening edges that were never meant to be soft. I stood up, smoothed my robe and walked toward the mirror. My reflection looked calm, almost composed. If someone had walked in at that moment, they would have thought I was fine. That was always my specialty. I hadn't expected perfection from my parents. I wasn't naive enough for that. I just thought on my wedding day there might be presents. Even late presents. Even awkward presents. I would have taken a rushed hug, a distracted smile, a "we'll see you at the ceremony" text. Instead, I got a warning. My phone buzzed again. My heart jumped before my brain could stop it. I grabbed it too fast, hope embarrassing and automatic. A notification from Instagram. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that now. But muscle memory is powerful, especially when you're trying not to feel something. The first story that loaded belonged to my brother. Bright sunlight, blue water, champagne glasses clinking together in a looping video. My parents were in the background, relaxed and smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. My mother's head was tilted back in laughter. My father had his arms slung over the back of a chair, looking unbothered, unhurried. The caption read, "Much needed family time." My stomach dropped, so suddenly I had to sit back down. I tapped through the next slide. Same location, different angle. A resort pool I recognized immediately. White umbrellas. Palm shadows. Napa. The place I had once suggested to my mother when she told me she was exhausted, overwhelmed, stretched too thin. She'd laughed then, said it was too indulgent, too expensive, not her kind of thing. Apparently it was her kind of thing. Just not for me. I scrolled once more before I could stop myself. My sister-in-law leaned into my mother, both of them smiling like they shared a private world I'd never been invited into. Someone had tagged the location. Someone had tagged everyone. Everyone except me. I set the phone down carefully, like it might break if I moved too fast. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I'd expected tears, anger, something loud. Instead, there was just a heavy quiet settling in my chest, like a door closing without a slam. 3 seats. That's how many I had reserved for them in the front row. I had double-checked the place cards myself, corrected the spelling of my mother's name, retied the ribbons when the planner's knots looked sloppy. I'd imagined her dabbing her eyes during the vows, my father standing stiffly beside her, pretending he wasn't proud. I hadn't expected miracles. I had expected effort. My fiancé, Daniel, had asked me a week earlier if I was sure about the seating. He'd said it gently, carefully, Like he didn't want to break something fragile. What if they don't come? He'd asked. I remembered smiling too quickly. They will. Or if they don't, at least I'll know I tried. What I hadn't said, what I hadn't even admitted to myself, was that I needed this day to mean something more. I needed it to be the moment they chose me. The moment I wasn't optional. The phone stayed silent after that. No follow-up. No explanation. Just those 3 unfinished words echoing in my head as the clock crept closer to the ceremony. At 10:42 a.m., 18 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I realized something quietly devastating. My mother hadn't forgotten my wedding. She had chosen not to be part of it. And in that moment, sitting alone in a room full of celebration, I felt the first shift inside me. Not anger, not grief, but something colder, steadier. Like the beginning of clarity. People like to believe moments like this come out of nowhere. That one text, one decision, one absence suddenly shatters everything. But the truth is, nothing about that morning was new. It only felt sharper because it finally had nowhere left to hide. As I sat there in my hotel room, veil draped over the back of a chair like it was waiting for me to catch up, memories I'd spent years smoothing over began to line up quietly, one after another. Not dramatic scenes. Not explosive fights. Just absence. Silence. Small dismissals that stacked so neatly I'd mistaken them for normal. My parents didn't come to my college graduation. I remember that day clearly. The auditorium smelled like polished wood and nerves. I'd flown across the country by myself, dragging a suitcase that was slightly too big, telling myself it was fine. They'd called the night before and said work was hectic, travel was complicated, but they were so proud of me. I believed them because I needed to. I walked across the stage alone, smiled for photos alone, went out to dinner alone. 2 weeks later I saw pictures online. My parents and my brother on a weekend getaway. Matching smiles. No mention of work being hectic then. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I was good at that. When my first startup took off, my father called me brilliant, then immediately asked if I could help him temporarily with some business expenses. When my mother introduced me to her friends, she didn't mention the company. She said I was doing something with computers. I laughed along, pretending it didn't sting. At family gatherings, I learned to make myself useful. I poured drinks, organized rides, covered checks before anyone could argue. It was easier than explaining why I was there. My value was quiet, behind the scenes, best appreciated when it wasn't acknowledged at all. There were jokes too. The kind that land just lightly enough that you'd look dramatic if you flinched. My father once said I was a lucky accident at Christmas dinner, chuckling as if it was charming. Someone else laughed. I did too, because that's what you do when the room expects you to. My mother told an aunt within earshot that I was too sensitive to handle anything serious. I pretended not to hear her, my face warm, my smile fixed. I always pretended. Even when they opened a business credit line using my name without asking. Even when I noticed charges that didn't belong to me and convinced myself it was simpler not to question them. I told myself family helps family. I told myself this was love, just inefficiently expressed. So when my phone stayed silent that wedding morning, part of me still waited for the explanation. A delayed call. A rushed apology. Something that would let me excuse it one more time. I stood up and walked toward the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to let the light in. Below, the city looked unreal, bright, busy, completely indifferent to the fact that my world felt like it was tilting. Somewhere down there, guests were arriving. Flowers were being placed. Music was being tested. And my family was poolside, raising glasses. I checked the seating chart on the small table near the door. 3 empty spots in the front row, printed neatly like they belonged there. I wondered if anyone would notice. If anyone would ask. I wondered how many more times I would be expected to explain their absence for them. The thing that hurt the most wasn't that they weren't coming. It was that my mother's message wasn't about me at all. She hadn't asked if I was okay. She hadn't asked if I needed her. She'd asked me, on the most important day of my life, not to make things uncomfortable for them. That was the pattern, wasn't it? Their comfort first. Their image. Their plans. I was expected to shrink around it. A knock sounded at the door. One of the bridesmaids peeked in, smiling wide. 5-minute warning, she said cheerfully. You ready? I nodded automatically. Yeah. Almost. The word almost hung there after she closed the door. I took one last look at my phone. Still nothing. No new messages. No missed calls. Just that same unfinished sentence sitting there like a final instruction. Don't make them. I turned the phone off. Not dramatically. Not with shaking hands. Just a simple press of the button. Like turning down a volume that had been too loud for too long. I placed it face down on the nightstand and stood there for a second longer than necessary. For the first time, I let myself think a thought I'd never allowed before. What if this isn't an accident? What if this is the answer? My chest felt heavy, but there was something else under it too, something steadier. The realization that I had been bending myself for years, trying to earn something that was never being offered. I smoothed my dress. I adjusted my veil. I took a breath that felt deeper than the ones before it. When the music started outside, I didn't look at the empty seats again. I stepped forward anyway. And as I walked toward the door, I didn't know it yet, but something inside me was already deciding that this would be the last time I explained their absence. The music began softly. The kind of instrumental version of a love song people chose when they wanted the moment to feel timeless. The doors opened and suddenly everyone was standing. Faces turned toward me. Cameras lifted. Smiles appeared on cue. I stepped forward. For a split second, I searched the front row anyway. It was instinctive, the way your eyes look for something familiar before your brain can stop them. 3 empty chairs stared back at me, their neat place cards still resting against the polished wood. No movement. No late entrance. No whispered apology. Just absence. I felt it then, not like a knife, not like a collapse. Felt like weight. Like something finally settling where it had been hovering for years. The realization wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet and heavy, and once it landed it didn't move. They weren't coming. And more than that, they hadn't planned to. I kept walking. Each step felt deliberate, grounded. I held my bouquet a little tighter, not because I was nervous, but because it gave my hands something to do while my mind rearranged itself. The aisle felt longer than I remembered from the rehearsal, but not in a bad way. It gave me time. Time to breathe. Time to accept what I already knew. When I reached the altar, Daniel's eyes met mine. His expression shifted immediately. Not with panic, not with pity, but with something protective. He squeezed my hand gently once like he was saying, I'm here. You don't have to look anywhere else. I hadn't told him about the message. I hadn't told anyone. I didn't want sympathy filling the air where joy was supposed to live. I didn't want whispers or side glances, or well-meaning questions I wasn't ready to answer. So I smiled. And the ceremony went on. The officiant spoke about love, about choosing each other, about building something intentional. The words floated over me, some of them landing, some of them sliding past. When it was my turn to speak, my voice wavered for half a second. Daniel's hand tightened around mine, steady and grounding. I choose you, I said, and I meant it more deeply than I ever had. We exchanged rings. We kissed. Applause filled the space, warm and genuine. Cameras flashed. Laughter followed. From the outside it looked perfect. Like the kind of wedding people would call beautiful without knowing why. Inside me something was changing shape. Not breaking, hardening. At the reception people hugged me, congratulated me, told me how stunning everything was. Daniel's parents held me like they'd been waiting years to do it. My friends cried openly, unapologetically. No one asked about the empty seats, and for that I was grateful. I danced. I laughed. I posed for photos. I showed up. And that was when it hit me. I had always been the one who showed up. I showed up to conversations where I wasn't heard. To events where I wasn't prioritized. To relationships where my role was to support quietly and not ask for too much in return. I had shown up for them in every way that mattered, even when they hadn't bothered to meet me halfway. That night, after the music faded and guests drifted toward the bar upstairs, I slipped back into the suite alone. The room was dim now, the earlier excitement replaced by a heavy stillness. I sat at the small desk by the window, my dress pulled around me, and finally let the silence speak. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I wasn't even crying. What I felt was clarity. I opened my laptop, not with a plan, not with adrenaline, but with a strange calm I didn't recognize yet. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I only knew what I wasn't going to do anymore. I wasn't going to explain them. I wasn't going to protect them. And I wasn't going to keep pretending this was accidental. They had made a choice. And for the first time in my life, so had I. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. Not because everything felt resolved, but because something inside me had finally stopped fighting itself. The endless cycle of maybe this time had gone quiet. When I woke up, Daniel was still asleep beside me. His arm draped across my waist, his breathing slow and even. I watched him for a moment, the steadiness of him, the fact that he had shown up without conditions, without negotiations. I slipped out of bed carefully and went into the bathroom, closing the door softly behind me. I turned my phone back on. It buzzed immediately. Missed calls. Messages. Notifications piling up so fast I couldn't read them all at once. My father. My brother. Numbers I didn't recognize but understood immediately. Family. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look devastated. I didn't look victorious. I looked focused. At exactly 10 a.m., while the city outside continued like nothing had changed, I sat down with my laptop, and I started making decisions. I didn't rush. That part surprised me the most. There was no shaking, no racing heart, no dramatic soundtrack playing in my head. I sat at the small table near the window with a cup of coffee that went untouched. The city stretched out below me, indifferent and calm. It felt important that I do this slowly, intentionally. Like if I stayed steady, the choices would stay clean. I opened my laptop and logged into the accounts I knew by memory. For years, I had made it easy for my family. Too easy. I told myself it was simpler than arguing, kinder than setting boundaries, safer than rocking a boat that had never really been mine. I'd called it generosity. I'd called it love. But sitting there that morning, one thought kept returning with surprising clarity. Love doesn't come with access codes. I started with the corporate cards. There were 6 of them. I recognized each account instantly. The explanations they'd given me years ago lined up neatly in my head. Temporary. Just until things stabilize. For networking. For charity outreach. For family emergencies. I clicked through them one by one. Freeze. Confirm. Freeze. Confirm. Each action was met with a neutral pop-up, the kind that didn't care about emotional context or family history. The system didn't ask me why. It only asked me if I was sure. I was. Within minutes, every card tied to my umbrella was inactive. Somewhere, my father would eventually try to pay for something that no longer processed. My brother would stare at a booking screen that refused to move forward. My mother would ask a question that didn't have an answer she liked. The thought didn't bring me satisfaction. It brought relief. Next, the foundation. I had started it after my second company went public. It was supposed to mean something. Education grants. Community programs. Support for people who didn't have quiet safety nets the way my family did. I brought my parents in because I thought, maybe foolishly, that sharing something meaningful would finally make me more than just a resource. Instead, they turned it into a stage. Lavish board dinners. Site visits that somehow aligned perfectly with luxury travel seasons. Expenses that never quite added up, but always came with a casual explanation I'd learned not to challenge. That morning, I didn't argue with the numbers. I documented them. I froze the foundation's operational accounts and sent a formal notice to the board initiating a full internal audit. No emotion. No accusations. Just facts and procedure. Then came the trust. That one took the longest. The trust had been set up to protect everyone's future. Generational. Careful. I had already been questioning it long before the wedding, watching funds drain without purpose or accountability. I had told myself I was being dramatic, ungrateful, too sensitive. Funny how those words disappear when the truth finally shows itself. I initiated the dissolution process, fully aware it wouldn't collapse overnight. Didn't need to. The point wasn't destruction. It was separation. By the time Daniel woke up, my family's access to my life, financially, structurally, quietly, was already unraveling. He found me sitting by the window, laptop closed, staring out at nothing in particular. "You okay?" he asked gently. I nodded. "I will be." He didn't push. He never did. We went out for brunch later, just the two of us, at a small cafe where no one recognized us. where the plates chipped at the edges and the coffee was strong. It felt normal. Grounded. Almost boring in the best way. When we got back to the hotel, I finally listened to the voicemails. My father's came first. His voice was controlled, tight. "Elaine, call me. We need to talk. You've made a mistake." My brother's followed, sharper, already angry. "What did you do to the cards?" "I was in the middle of booking something for Mom." My mother's message was last. "I told you not to make this about you. No apology. No concern. Just blame." I deleted them all. By afternoon, emails started coming in, confused, procedural, increasingly urgent. The foundation board. A junior attorney asking questions that were careful and neutral. Everything had shifted from personal to official. That's when I knew I'd done the right thing. My family had always thrived in private spaces, where guilt could be applied quietly and expectations went unchallenged. They were terrible in daylight. That evening, my brother tried again. I let it go to voicemail. "So this is it," he said bitterly. "You're punishing us because we didn't show up to your wedding? You know how bad this makes you look." Daniel listened beside me as I replayed it. "You're not punishing them," he said when it ended. "You're stopping the bleeding." I leaned back against the couch and exhaled. For the first time, the story wasn't about revenge or justice or even fairness. It was about access. And I was finally deciding who deserved it. I thought that would be the end of it. Not because I believed my family would suddenly understand, but because I had underestimated how deeply entitlement can root itself when it's been fed for years. I had taken away access, not their expectation of it. An expectation, when threatened, doesn't go quietly. By Wednesday, the tone of the messages changed. The confusion faded. The panic sharpened. What replaced it wasn't concern, it was strategy. An email landed in my inbox just after 8 in the morning. Polite. Carefully worded. From an attorney whose name I recognized immediately. My father had used him years earlier during a deal that had lived just close enough to the line to make everyone uncomfortable, but never close enough to be provable. He wrote about distress. About financial harm. About reputational risk. He suggested we discuss reconsideration before things escalated. I read the email once. Then again. Not because it intimidated me, but because it confirmed something I needed to be sure of. They didn't think they'd done anything wrong. I forwarded the message to my legal team with a single line. "Please respond." 3 hours later, the attorney replied with one word. "Understood." That night, my father showed up at my apartment. I hadn't given him the address. He must have pulled it from old paperwork, something he hadn't bothered to forget because he'd never imagined needing it this way. I opened the door just enough to see his face, red, tight, already angry. "You humiliated us," he said immediately. No greeting. No acknowledgement of the wedding. "I had a meeting canceled. Card stopped working. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I listened without interrupting. I'd done that for years. The difference was, this time I wasn't absorbing it. "You think your husband is going to be enough?" he snapped. "You think you're something without us?" I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. "It's over," I said calmly. "Every tie. Financial. Legal. Personal." His mouth opened, ready with threats or guilt dressed up as concern. I didn't wait to hear it. I walked back inside and locked the door. The next morning, my sister made it public. She posted a long thread online. Measured, emotional, carefully framed. She painted herself as the mediator. Claimed I'd cut the family off without warning. Said money had changed me. Attached photos from Napa. Smiling faces. Togetherness. She framed it as healing. As unity. As something I had chosen not to attend. The replies came fast. Strangers speculated. Some sided with her. Others called me cold. People I recognized were tagged, former colleagues, distant relatives, friends who didn't know the full story. I didn't respond. I forwarded the post to my lawyer and asked him to initiate the second audit. If they wanted sympathy, I would give them facts. That afternoon, an email arrived from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. Subject: "I think you should see this." Her name was Jenna. She had worked briefly with the foundation before leaving quietly. No exit interview. No drama. Just gone. 10 minutes later, a shared drive appeared in my inbox. It held over 100 files. receipts, expense reports, emails, voice recordings, trips labeled as outreach that aligned perfectly with resort bookings, forged approvals using my digital signature, personal expenses disguised as nonprofit costs. I stared at the screen, not shocked, just confirmed. I sent everything to my legal team. My lawyer called within minutes. "This isn't mismanagement," he said carefully. "This is fraud." 3 days later, the foundation froze all remaining accounts and suspended operations pending investigation. A public statement went out citing internal review and cooperation with authorities. No names were mentioned. They didn't need to be. That night, my mother texted me, "You went too far." No apology, just blame. I didn't reply. By Tuesday, a journalist reached out with questions about the foundation's sudden suspension. I directed him to the filings. Then, quietly, the IRS audit was triggered. I hadn't reported them. I didn't have to. While they were sipping champagne during my wedding weekend, they had been sealing their own fate. By the end of the week, the silence from their side felt different. Strategic. Careful. But this time, no one was left to shield them. And for the first time, I realized something that settled deep in my chest. This wasn't revenge. It was accountability. The begging didn't start right away. At first, there was silence, thick, calculated, unfamiliar. The kind of quiet that isn't peace but pause. The kind people use when they're reassessing leverage. I recognized it instantly. I'd lived inside it my whole life. Then slowly the noise returned. Different this time. My brother showed up one night just before midnight. I watched him from the window as he rang the bell again and again. His shoulders tense, his movements sharp. I didn't let him in. From the sidewalk he called me. "You win," he said bitterly. "You destroyed everything. Hope you're happy." He talked about our mother not eating, our father stressed, extended family panicking. Then he said the thing that finally burned away any remaining doubt. "You were supposed to take care of us. Not we're sorry. Not we were wrong. Just entitlement stripped bare." When I went back inside, Daniel was waiting. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, and for the first time it was completely true. The lawsuit came on Monday morning at 9:13 a.m. All of them were listed: my parents, my brother, my sister. The language was dramatic, heavy with words like betrayal, emotional harm, familial obligation. It read like a performance meant to scare me back into place. I felt tired. Our lawyers responded within 48 hours. Not defensively, decisively. They filed a counterclaim backed by evidence. Jenna's archive, transaction histories, forged approvals, internal communications. Within days, their attorney asked for an extension. Then another. Then nothing at all. The banks moved next. Accounts closed. Credit lines revoked. Even their lawyer's retainer became an issue. The structure they'd leaned on for years collapsed faster than I'd expected. Then the investigations concluded. The foundation dissolved. Donations were returned where possible. Statements were issued. Names weren't dragged through the press, but the truth was documented carefully, permanently. My family stopped calling. A month later, my mother showed up at my office. She looked smaller, older. She asked the receptionist if she could see me. I sent word back that I was unavailable. When she left, I felt a brief tug of something, habit maybe. The reflex to comfort her, even after everything. It passed. 6 months later, something unexpected happened. I became a mother. Our son arrived early, healthy, loud, impossibly present. Holding him rewired something in me. Not in a sentimental way, but in a grounding one. Love didn't feel like something I had to earn anymore. We named him Jacob. We threw him a small first birthday party. Friends. Daniel's parents. The people who had shown up for us without conditions. I sent one invitation to my parents. No note. No explanation. They didn't respond. For a second, the old reflex flickered. The urge to wonder what I could have done differently. Then Jacob laughed, banging a toy against the table. Completely absorbed in the moment, and the feeling dissolved. This time there was no money involved. No access. Just an invitation to a child's life. And that still wasn't enough. I wasn't angry. I was clear. Life didn't become dramatic after that. It became quiet. Not the hollow quiet I'd grown up with, but the steady kind. The kind that doesn't demand anything from you. The kind that lets you breathe. Late one night, Jacob asleep in my arms, Daniel humming softly in the kitchen. I stood by the window and looked out at the city lights. There was no audience. No performance. No one keeping score. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for impact. When people asked how I was doing, I didn't say fine out of habit anymore. I said good, and I meant it. I thought I'd feel victorious watching my family's world shrink. I didn't. I felt removed, like I'd stepped out of a long-running play, and only then realized how exhausting it had been to stay in character. My mother sent one email months later. 3 careful sentences. She said she hoped I was well. That she prayed for Jacob. That she wished things had turned out differently. She didn't say sorry. I read it once. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger, out of honesty. Because the truth was I didn't need anything from her anymore. Not closure. Not acknowledgement. Not understanding. I had already given myself what she never could. Sometimes I think back to that wedding morning. The unfinished sentence. The moment I still believed that if I waited long enough, they'd choose me. I don't judge that version of myself anymore. She was surviving with the tools she had. But I'm done waiting. I didn't destroy my family. I stopped funding a lie. I stopped protecting people who mistook access for love. And when there was nothing left for them to take, they disappeared. Because that's all they had ever come for. Now there is no leverage. No obligation. Just the life I built and the family that chose me back. And for the first time, that's enough.